So when my dad was at the point of the end of his life, we actually had an opportunity to utilize hospice, and they were the greatest people ever. I cannot overtell you how wonderful they were. So what I want to communicate to the listeners is please don't hesitate. People hear the H word and they get all upset. Hospice does not always mean end of life. It can. And if you are at a place like that, having that support is fantastic. And I would encourage caregivers, do not hesitate to utilize these professionals who are available. They are there for you. And so don't hold back. Don't hesitate.
Welcome to the Care Chronicles with a Caring Touch, where compassion meets wisdom in every episode, dedicated to our beloved seniors and caregivers. Join us as we explore the heartwarming stories, experts' insights, and practical advice that make every moment with our elderly truly special. Get ready for insightful conversations, practical tips, and heartfelt moments that warm the heart and nourish the soul. Because here at A Caring Touch, we believe in laughter, learning, and love as essential ingredients to aging gracefully. So tune in, relax, let A Caring Touch be your guide to making every moment count. Hey there, podcast pals. Welcome back to the Care Chronicles. I'm your host, Avishka, and today's episode, I believe, will speak to so many of you currently going through your own caregiving journey. Today, I'm joined by author Leah Stanley, the author for Goodnight Sweet and Everything I Wish I Had Known. Leah stepped into the role of caregiving at a very young age, navigating the challenges facing dementia with love, resilience, and compassion. In this conversation, she opens up about what she's learned through this process, what she wished she had known whenever she had started, and all the different ways and all the avenues that need to be navigated whenever you are in the position of caregiving for someone that you love or care for. So let's dive in. Hi there, podcast pals. Welcome back. And my name's Avishka, your host. Today we have author Leah Stanley here with us. And she's the author for Goodnight Sweet and Everything I Wish I Had Known. So welcome, Leah. Thank you so much for taking this time. And for those in the audience who haven't had the chance to read your book, so can you briefly kind of go over your story as a caregiver and how it all started?
Oh, definitely. I'm always glad for an opportunity to share that because when this all happened to me, I knew nothing and I had to learn everything from the ground up. And so it was very important to me after my experience, after I came through it, to be able to share that with people because I remembered what it felt like not having any information. For me, when I talk to audiences and caregivers and maybe even people that are about to be caregivers, I like to introduce it this way. I have three numbers that I want to draw your attention to: 29, 8, and 2. 29 is how old I was when this whole caregiving thing fell in on me. 8 is the number of months I had been married when all of this happened. And 2 is the number of people that I suddenly found myself responsible to care for. And that was my grandparents. So it was quite the wild ride of being 29 years old, really not having a concept at all of what I needed to do for my grandparents. They were both diagnosed with dementia on the same day at the same time. It was a shocking, turn of events. I tell people dementia was a term that I had learned in a college psychology class. I could give you a rudimentary definition of it, enough to pass a test, which I did, and that was it. Once I passed that test, I was out that class and we were on to other things. But suddenly I was being confronted with, oh, they, not just one, but both of them have this. And so I went on a campaign of having to learn. I did indeed have the documentation that I needed. The difficulty was I didn't know what documents I had. I didn't know what the documents did. And I had to learn. I had to learn everything from the ground up and what it really meant to be an advocate for my grandparents. Again, both of them. Learned a great deal as I went through all that, the financial aspect of long-term care and what it looked like having to go through my grandparents' resources to provide care for them. I honestly think sometimes I don't know how I got through it. God is so faithful, though. He brings us through these places in our lives where we just honestly don't know. And I'm so, so thankful. So, my degree is in journalism. So, when I reached the end of my caregiving journey, I wanted to write my story because, as I said, I knew there were going to be other people coming up behind me. And my real attitude was, I don't want anybody being caught in the dark of ignorance where I was. So
I
I
love
wrote the book, and that was Goodnight Sweet. I have it back here. Goodnight Sweet, A Caregiver's Long Goodbye. And it details the whole story from the phone call that started everything to probating the will when it was over. And while that book was going through the editorial process, my publisher approached me and he said, I want you to write another book. And I was like, oh, I just came out of writing mode. I don't know if I'm ready to go back in. And he said, no, no. He said, I think you're going to want to do this. And he said, I want you to write the book you wish you had had. He said, I want you to write and develop a guide to help people understand the legal, the medical, the financial, the family relationships, the care recipient safety, and caregiver self care. He said, I want you to cover, any of these topics or all of them. But he said, this is down in the grass, down in the grassroots area where people really live when they're doing caregiving. And I was ecstatic to take that assignment, if you will. So I did.
it.
That turned into my second book, which is also back here. And so those are tools that I use when I speak because, again, I want to help people understand. I don't want anybody in the confusion that I was in. It was awful. And you got enough going on. When there's caregiving happening, when you've got a loved one that needs care, there's enough going on without having to try to figure your way out in the dark. So if I can help people through that, that's
Mhm.
a good thing for me.
I completely agree. Starting with your story of like your grandparents, I know you said
Mhm.
they were both diagnosed on the same day, pretty much the same time.
Yeah.
And I mean, you said you were 29, 8 months married. That's like already a lot of change going on in your life. And then, yeah, oh, like now you're having to care for your loved ones, which is such a noble and amazing thing that you did. Were there any signs that you can think of, or were there any points in time before they were diagnosed that, that you were like, okay, you could see there was a deterioration, or you could see that, hey, grandpa's forgetting things a little more, or grandma's forgetting things a little more, things are declining a little for them more than expected? Was it something that you knew was coming, or
Ironically, knowing what I know now, I look back and it was a glaring neon sign going, there is a major problem. And let's go over the fact I was 29.
no,
The
I
year before, I was planning a wedding and I was doing all of that. I had a career that I was working on. I was doing all these things that you do when you're 29.
yeah.
And I look back now, as I said, I realize now it's like, oh my gosh, how could I have not seen it? But you don't always know what you're seeing. And that was
Mhm.
my situation. I mean, really, I can't oversell the ignorant part. I tell people all the time, it's like, you don't understand what I mean. You think that I knew some stuff. No, I am telling you. The best example I give when I am talking to audiences, and especially if I'm delving into like the medical side of a dementia diagnosis, I share this story. My then boyfriend, about to be fiance, now husband, Chris,
Mhm.
and I had gone to visit my grandparents in the summer of 1995. And we were having a perfectly lovely visit. All was well. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Grandma wants to know, did we hear about the actress who had died? And we were, Chris and I looked at each other. We were like, oh no, I don't know. Who? Did you hear something on the news? Who passed away? She couldn't remember, but she was blonde and she had committed suicide. And Chris and I are still looking at each other very baffled. And all of a sudden, Chris realized and he looked at her. He said, are you talking about Marilyn Monroe? Yes, that was the name. That was it. And we were just like, I mean, it was 33 years after her death in the summer of 95. 33 years. And my grandma is talking about Marilyn's death as though it had just happened. Like she just heard it that morning on the news. And we were Lord, I mean, what do you do with that? That was glaring. And so I came away and I remember coming home and I talked about it with my mom. And I said, what on earth is happening here? And oh, actually, I say that. Okay, let me clarify for the listeners. because people do grab hold of this when I'm talking. They're my grandparents. I just mentioned my mom. People start going, wait a minute, wait. What's the granddaughter doing? What about your mother's their child, right? Okay, no, stop. Their son was my biological father. And he and my mother had been married about 5 years. Then I was born. And then all of a sudden, he decided that being married was that just was inconvenient and he didn't want this whole new baby thing. So he just left. So when he left me and my mom, but he also left his parents. I mean, he just went away and that branches off. In fact, I go into a lot of detail in my book to lay that foundation. He went off to have his own life elsewhere, which he did. He actually committed bigamy, started a whole new family. It was just bizarre situation, but that's the reason. So as my grandparents continued to age and I was growing up into adulthood, they began to realize they were not going to be able to count on him. So they had to look elsewhere as they were preparing their documents of who could take care of us in the event, obviously when they made the preparations, everything was okay. But they wanted to be ready just in case. So that's also something I talk about is the need to be prepared ahead of time. That's why you want to get all this done ahead of time because I cannot overemphasize how bad it would have been when the bottom fell out if they had not done the paperwork and didn't have all the right documentation in order for me to step into that role. It would have been a train wreck.
And, like, they did, like, some of the legwork of, like, getting some information, like advanced directives, I'm guessing?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
They
Ama
provided me with now this was back in these documents were drafted in 1994 and it was about almost going to be 3 years before they were actually going to be needed. But this was back in the day when a power of attorney document was a sort of a one-stop shop and that's what I got. It took care of the medical, it took care of the financial, it was the whole shebang in that one
on
document.
everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Today, the documents are drafted differently. A power of attorney that is a durable power of attorney is what's needed to handle finances, and a medical power of attorney, a separate document, is what's needed to make the healthcare decisions. But it all kind of came to the same thing. I always explain to people you can have the same person who holds the responsibility on both documents just because they are separate. But the fact that they are separate, maybe you've got two kids and maybe one is really good with the money and the other is really good with the health stuff. That's perfect. Give the financial power of attorney to the one that can handle the money and then give the medical power of attorney to the other. So you have some options now, but the way they drafted their documents, I was given power of attorney, durable power of attorney, and could make all decisions. The money, handling the property, handling their healthcare decisions, all of that, and all of that fell in like a big giant weight, because again,
You still had a lot more to do. That's very awesome that, like, your grandparents, took the time, set those up, and made you, you know, had that paperwork already ready for you so you can just step into the role, but actually doing the role itself is a lot more. And I kinda want you to talk a little more into that as well. But say someone's going into this and they don't have all of that set up. What's one thing you would tell them to start off the bat? Like, this is how you
uh,
should get prepared. This is where you should go
exactly.
start. This is where you should get, like, this is where you should go first.
I am the person people know what I do, and so I'm the person that gets the calls. They'll have, "Can you talk to my friend who's got a coworker whose mother just got diagnosed?" And I'm always glad to do that because, again, in my position, I would have latched on to somebody, and clutched with both hands, somebody that could have talked me through. So I'm always glad to do that. And when I get on the phone with these folks, the first question I ask is, do you have the proper paperwork to provide the care legally? And the answers vary from, yes, I do have it. That's the one I hear the least. Or, no, I don't have it. Or, this is the most popular one. What paperwork? That's what I hear the most. Undoubtedly, it is the most shocking thing. But so I have to walk through, okay, this is the documents you need. This is what it needs to do. This is what you can't do without this document. And as we walk through, I've had to break the news to people that, you're in a bad situation. It may be too late,
Oh,
may not be. And that's why I always encourage, please talk to an attorney. I was actually doing a talk last week and in the Q&A part, someone asked me, is it okay if I draft my own documents? I can go online and do this. And I'm like, you can. But I always look at people and I'm like, so would you take your appendix out? And they're always looking at me like, "Oh, no, what do you mean? No." I said, "No, you wouldn't because you are okay, well, so you wouldn't take your own out. Would you take somebody else's out? You haven't been to medical school. You haven't been trained. Would you take someone's appendix out?" And of course, they're always like, "Well, no, of course not." Same thing here. Yes, you can draft these documents, you can have a notary sign them. The problem is they could be easily challenged. And you never know. That's just something I deal with in the family relationship chapter where you just don't know what is going to come out of the family tree woodwork, so to speak. So I always tell people go talk to an attorney. Often, a first visit with an attorney will be free of charge. They will do a consultation with no charge. Now, I always say verify that because not all of them will. Verify before you make an appointment. Will this cost me anything? Can I come in and just have a consultation? If that's the case, take the time, talk to an attorney, explain your family dynamic. Your family may be different than my family. I may have elements that are going on that you don't have. So talk to somebody in the know, get a professional opinion, and then have them walk you through exactly what your documents need to be and what will happen. If you have this, you can take care of this. If you don't have, this is what has to happen. Not having it turns out to be way more expensive and it takes a really long time. A person has to be named a guardian or a conservator. Conservator will handle money, the guardian handles usually healthcare choices. But it takes time to get on a judge's docket. It takes time to file all the paperwork and everything that has to go into that. And meanwhile, let's say it's mother. We'll use mother as our hypothetical example. Let's say mother's over there and she's clearly got a problem to the degree that you've now realized you need to be her caregiver. Problem is, without the right paperwork, nobody's going to listen to you. HIPAA, people get all upset about that. They're like, "Oh, I can't talk to you about it." And I mean, legally so, they have to be very careful. So it really is a way, way better thing for people to get the paperwork and get all the documents ahead of time. And that's something I try to go into, in particular in my second book. I look at the legal material and I've put the material in plain, ordinary talk, the way people talk. And I don't use long legal phrases and go into long definitions. I tried very hard to make it clear where it made sense to the ordinary person like me because I laughed. That's what my publisher said he wanted. He said, "Write the book you wish you'd had." So I did. I wrote a book in plain, ordinary talk that made sense to me. So I think that's one of the keys is for people to understand what the documents are, why they need them, and what kind of a bad situation they're looking at if they don't have them.
So once you have the documents, I know for you yourself, you had those, right? You had everything
Mhm.
set in
I
place.
did.
I mean, there's still so much you don't know. What's one thing that you wish you had known at that point? Like, okay, this is what to expect. This is what to expect in this aspect in terms of being financially responsible for my grandparents. And this is what to expect in this aspect as to what to be medically responsible for my grandparents. I know for you, I mean, you got two at once. So,
It was crazy. One of the biggest issues for me, certainly the steep learning curve of what was going to be required legally, what could I do for them versus what could I not do for them, how responsible was I going to be, all of those things, that was all going to come in time. The other part of it that was also going to come in time, but wasn't nearly as clear, was how do you work with the person living with dementia? That for me was so, so difficult. My grandmother would say something to me, or actually I laugh, and one of the best examples was my grandfather. He would say to me, "Now, Leah, we need our car. We need to get back home. We've got to have our car." Okay, so initially I would look at him logically, as I would tell you or anyone else, "You can't take your car, Grandpa. There was a problem here." The whole thing started with this impromptu road trip. They took a trip, and 4 days later, they were found on the side of the road 2 hours from home. It was unbelievable. So yeah, when it fell in hard. I mean, it was a
yeah.
massive collapse of awful everything falling in at once. So
Mm.
the car had been partially wrecked, and so clearly he was in no condition to drive. So I was just telling him, "Grandpa, you can't do that. You wrecked the car." And he was looking at me like, "I didn't wreck that car. Who wrecked the car? What are you talking about?" And I was like, "When you were in Forest City, don't you remember?" We were never in Forest City. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." He didn't know. And I didn't understand the nature of dementia. I didn't understand. He wasn't messing with me. He wasn't trying to sweep it under the rug, like, yeah, I realize something has, and I'm gonna.
Yes.
It
Mhm.
was gone, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." It took me such a time, such a hard learning curve of having to realize, do not argue with them. They don't understand. He knew I was frustrated. He could see it on my face. That's the thing. With dementia, the person living in dementia does not understand why you're upset. They know you're upset. Intuitive thought is never lost. It's there. It's there to the end. But the cognition to reason why. Why are you so upset? He didn't know. My grandmother would tell me that she had just put my biological father, her son, her only son, I just put little Ray to bed. And I remember thinking, well, if that's some trick, you just told his grown daughter that you put your little son to bed. I was like, What?" It was a mess because I didn't know how to respond to things like that. And I mean, you have to know when you were working with someone living with dementia, the hits are keep on coming. I mean, it was just every time they would open their mouth, they would say something that was, to my mind, so off the wall. Well, they weren't being off the wall and they weren't crazy. You hear a lot of people will say, well, that's crazy. Okay. No, there is a genuine brain health condition that was operating. And I had to learn fast. I had to get into, today we would Google it. Well, back in the day when I was dealing with this in 1997, the phrase "I'll Google it" just really was not an option that we had. And so I
Right.
tell people I had to pound a beat. I had to get in doctors' faces and nurses' faces and social workers and just anybody that was working with my grandparents. So I encourage people to, even today, Google's wonderful, but I always kind of jokingly say, I have a good friend who talks about people getting out their WebMD degree, and I laughed when I heard her say that first time. That's my plug for Susan Rook. But she talks about that, and I thought that is the best phrase right there because people do. They'll go online, they'll read a little bit, and they'll think they know. And it's like, so yeah, well, good, but there's more to it. There's a little more to it. So I encourage people, get educated. If your loved one has been diagnosed, and there are multiple different types, people here, they'll talk about dementia, they'll talk about Alzheimer's, they'll say, my loved one has Alzheimer's and dementia. They'll say it like it's two separate conditions and their loved one has both. And I'm like, okay, so let's understand what we're talking about here. Dementia is like an umbrella term. Think of it as the big umbrella. And up underneath this umbrella, we have multiple different types. Alzheimer's is a type. It is the most frequently diagnosed type, which is why we hear so much about it. But there are so many others. And there's, people are dealing with vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal disorders, things like that. And you're hearing more in the news about it as people, for example, Bruce Willis was diagnosed with frontotemporal disorder. So a lot of people began to hear about that. Robin Williams, after his death, it was diagnosed that he had Lewy body dementia. And that was not known prior to his death. And so it's like, if people can be educated, there's a lot we're still learning. Dementia is kind of a wild card, and not everything is known and understood about it, but they are constantly learning. And it's really amazing to be able to, again, go online and look at some of the medical journals and some of the talk that just ordinary people are having, like what we're talking about, the education that is available, things that you can learn and understand. Because at the end of the day, I joke and tell people, look, at the end of the day, you don't care what they call it. You just need to know how to work with your loved one. That's where the big concern is. How do I do it? That was my biggest thing. What do I say? What do I say when they say these things that just sound so, again, off the wall? What do I do? So that's a big deal for people.
Thank you for joining us on this heartwarming journey with a caring touch. Be sure to check out our website and connect with us on social media for more stories, resources, and ways to get involved. We're excited for you to join us again in our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the beauty of aging with grace and compassion and dive deeper into topics that matter to our elderly community. Until then, stay connected, stay caring, and we'll talk to you again soon on the Care Chronicles with a Caring Touch.